On the afternoon of June 14th, 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin crouched behind a bush in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, trying not to giggle. He was wearing a bright red t-shirt and green shorts, and he was about to pull off the perfect prank on his dad. His older brother Douglas and 2 other boys were hiding nearby, all of them waiting for just the right moment to jump out and scare the adults who were sitting around their campsite talking. But when the other 3 boys leapt from their hiding spots a few minutes later, laughing and shouting, Dennis never appeared, and he never would again. But before we get into today's story, if you love bizarre, unsolved mysteries and chilling true events told through immersive storytelling, then you're in exactly the right place, because that's what I specialize in. And I post new stories 3 to 4 times every week. So if that interests you, please tap the like button gently and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. All right, let's get into today's story, which takes place in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee, in June of 1969. Dennis Lloyd Martin was a bright, energetic 6-year-old boy from Knoxville, Tennessee. He had some mild learning disabilities, but he was sharp as a tack and loved being outdoors. Every year, the Martin family had a tradition where the men would take a camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains over Father's Day weekend. Dennis's dad, William Martin, his grandfather Clyde, and his 9-year-old brother Douglas had been doing this trip for years. But 1969 would be Dennis's first time joining them, and the little boy could barely contain his excitement. On Friday, June 13th, the 4 generations of Martin men loaded up their camping gear and headed out. They hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field, where they camped for the night. The next morning, Saturday, June 14th, they continued their hike toward Spence Field, a beautiful highland meadow along the Appalachian Trail, known for its stunning views of Mountain Laurel. Dennis, despite being the youngest, kept up with the experienced hikers without any trouble. The weather was perfect, and spirits were high. When they reached Spence Field around lunchtime, they ran into another family the Martins knew, who were also camping in the area. The 2 families decided to camp together, and as the adults sat around catching up and enjoying the scenery, the 4 boys started getting restless. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon when Dennis, Douglas, and the 2 other boys came up with their plan. They huddled together, whispering and giggling, and the adults could hear them plotting something. The boys wanted to play a prank on their parents by sneaking off into the woods and then jumping out to scare them. William Martin watched as his sons and the other 2 boys crept away from the campsite. Douglas and 2 of the boys went south and west, while Dennis, in his bright red t-shirt that stood out against the green forest, headed northwest toward a small patch of woods near the Appalachian Trail. William smiled. He could see Dennis's red shirt moving through the trees. The boy wasn't far, maybe 150 feet away at most. Then, about 3 to 5 minutes later, the 3 other boys burst from the woods, yelling and laughing. But Dennis wasn't with them. William stood up, expecting to see his youngest son come running out any second. But the forest was quiet. No movement, no bright red shirt. William called out, "Dennis! Come on out, buddy!" Nothing. He called again, louder this time. Still nothing. A knot formed in William's stomach. He quickly walked to where he'd last seen Dennis and started calling his name. The other adults joined in, their voices growing more urgent. William followed the Appalachian Trail west for about a mile, shouting Dennis's name the entire way. He thought maybe Dennis had gotten confused and wandered down the wrong trail. But there was no sign of him. By 6:30 p.m., as the sun began to sink lower in the sky, the families knew something was seriously wrong. A park ranger was notified, and by nightfall, a small search party had assembled. But then the weather turned. A massive thunderstorm rolled in, bringing hurricane-force winds and dumping 3 inches of rain on the mountains in just a few hours. Any footprints, any scent trail, any clues that might have helped them find Dennis were washed away in the deluge. The searchers had no choice but to wait until morning. At 5 a.m. on June 15th, the search for Dennis Martin officially began. What started as 30 park rangers quickly exploded into something unprecedented. By the end of the day, there were 240 searchers combing the mountains. News of the missing 6-year-old spread quickly, and volunteers poured in from everywhere. College students, firefighters, local residents, Boy Scout troops. Within days, the search party had swelled to over 1,400 people. The FBI got involved. The National Guard sent helicopters. Even 60 Green Berets who happened to be training in the area joined the effort. It was, and remains to this day, the largest search operation in the history of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Search dogs were brought in, though the heavy rain had eliminated most useful scent trails. Helicopters equipped with infrared technology flew overhead. Teams of searchers moved in grid patterns, covering 56 square miles of rugged mountain terrain. They found some possible clues, though nothing definitive. Near a stream several miles from Spence Field, searchers discovered a set of small footprints, one bare foot, and one wearing what appeared to be an Oxford-style shoe, exactly like the ones Dennis had been wearing. The tracks led to the water and then disappeared. But the area had already been thoroughly searched before this discovery, so investigators couldn't be certain the footprints belonged to Dennis. Then, something strange came to light. A man named Harold Key and his family had been visiting Cades Cove that same weekend, hoping to photograph a bear. On Saturday afternoon, around the time Dennis disappeared, they heard a terrifying, piercing scream that sounded like a child in distress. It came from somewhere in the forest near a place called Sea Branch, about 7 to 9 miles from Spence Field. Curious and concerned, Key went to investigate the area where the scream came from. He didn't find a child. Instead, he encountered something unsettling. An unkempt, disheveled man lurking in the woods. When the stranger noticed Key, he darted away through the trees, moving quickly. On the ground where the man had been standing was a piece of paper with a hand-drawn map on it. Before Key could grab it or get a better look at the stranger, the man had vanished. Key later saw what he believed was the same man driving away in a white Chevrolet. The man was never identified, and investigators couldn't determine if this incident had any connection to Dennis's disappearance. But the timing and location were suspicious enough that it couldn't be completely dismissed. The search continued day after day, week after week. The Red Cross set up food stations. The media covered the story extensively. The Martin family offered a $5,000 reward for any information. But despite the massive effort, despite the 13,420 man-hours invested, despite the approximately $70,000 spent on the operation, not a single solid clue to Dennis's whereabouts emerged. By June 26th, the search was scaled back significantly. On June 29th, major search operations were suspended. Park rangers held a meeting with FBI officials. The conclusion was grim. There was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no evidence of anything else. Dennis Martin had simply vanished. The park kept 3 of their best rangers searching for several more weeks, but on September 14th, 1969, exactly 3 months after Dennis disappeared, the search was officially closed. In 1975, 6 years after Dennis vanished, a ginseng hunter claimed he'd discovered scattered skeletal remains of a small child in an area called Big Hollow, near Tremont. The man said he'd actually found the remains years earlier, but kept quiet because he'd been harvesting ginseng illegally and feared prosecution. When authorities followed up on this lead in 1985, they conducted an extensive search of the area. They found nothing. No bones, no clothing, no evidence that a child had ever been there. In 1978, nearly a decade after Dennis's disappearance, the case took an even stranger turn. An FBI informant came forward with a shocking story. He claimed that a former cellmate of his had confessed to kidnapping a young boy named Dennis Martin from the Great Smoky Mountains and selling him to another man. FBI agents, who were unfamiliar with the case at the time, began investigating. They found a suspect whose name matched the description given by the informant. They obtained a photograph of this person and showed it to the informant, who confirmed it was the same man who'd confessed to the kidnapping. But that's where the trail went cold. The suspect was never arrested, never questioned, and the lead apparently went nowhere. For decades, the FBI kept their files on Dennis Martin classified, denying Freedom of Information Act requests from investigators and journalists. It wasn't until 2022 that they finally released 133 pages of documentation. What the files revealed was heartbreaking. Dennis's father, William Martin, had repeatedly begged the FBI to investigate his son's disappearance as a kidnapping. But without clear evidence that a crime had been committed, FBI agents said they had no jurisdiction. They acted more as observers than investigators. The files also showed that agents believed William Martin's mental health had deteriorated significantly after losing his son, making him vulnerable to psychics and wild theories about feral people living in the mountains, all of which the FBI refused to pursue. As for what actually happened to 6-year-old Dennis Martin, nobody knows. The prevailing theories include that he became disoriented after separating from the other boys and wandered deeper into the forest, eventually succumbing to exposure, dehydration, or possibly an animal attack. But the fact that such a massive search found absolutely nothing has always troubled investigators. No piece of clothing, no shoe, no trace of him anywhere. Some people believe the mysterious man Harold Key saw that day was somehow involved, that Dennis was abducted. Others point to the sheer impossibility of a small child disappearing so completely in a relatively contained area, suggesting something more inexplicable happened. The Dennis Martin case became one of the most famous examples of what's known as the missing 411 phenomenon, a term coined by researcher David Paulides to describe mysterious disappearances in national parks that share strange common characteristics. Dennis's case has all of them. He vanished in broad daylight with multiple adults nearby. He disappeared in an area that was immediately and extensively searched. No trace of him was ever found, and the circumstances surrounding his vanishing remain baffling to this day. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park remains the most visited national park in America, with millions of people hiking its trails every year. Somewhere in those mountains, now buried under more than 50 years of fallen leaves, decomposing plant matter, and topsoil, may lie the answer to what happened to Dennis Martin on that June afternoon in 1969. But as park officials have acknowledged, after this much time has passed, we will almost certainly never know the truth. The Dennis Martin case remains one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in American history. Whether he was lost, taken, or met some other fate, the 6-year-old boy, just days from his 7th birthday, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. If you found this story as disturbing as I did, I've got another missing 411 case you absolutely need to hear about. Click the video on your screen right now about the experienced firefighter who disappeared on a mountain and turned up thousands of miles away with no memory of how he got there. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories like this. Thanks for watching. Until next time, see ya.